For people that don't know what neuro-linguistic programming is, can you kind of break it down?
Right? If you can understand how things happen for you, how do you end up procrastinating? What is the series of steps that you do inside, the visuals, the sounds, the self-talk? You can actually do something about it. So it's a field of empowerment. As long as you can feel emotion in your body about something that happened in the past, and if you ask yourself, with what's happening in my life today, has that played a role? Then that's relevant. That it's highly relevant that you do something about it. It's taken residence.
How would you describe it? I mean, from a mechanism standpoint, like I've heard it said, like metabolizing stored trauma, like allowing the body to clear it. What's actually happening, I guess, as you're clearing these past emotional events?
It's sort of a mechanical process that involves a lot.
Reg, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Great to be here, Will.
Where are you based at? Where in the world are you at these days?
We're currently in Australia. We're based out of Australia, but a lot of our work is in the United States. So we're between the two countries most of the time.
Amazing. What got you into this work? I mean, kind of take me back to typically people have some personal experience that was formative in what compelled them or propelled them into their current passion.
Yeah, sure. Look, everyone has a story. There's a history, and generally it is of adversity. So certainly faced a lot of, I suppose, internal adversities, as a lot of people do in this field. And, at some point you end up looking for answers. I was a grown man. I was a, husband, a father, all those sorts of things. I was chasing, the usual things that people do, the common definitions of success, the money, the house, the cars, all those sorts of things. But there was always a void, there was always something missing because of what I'd experienced growing up. And in my case, it had a lot to do with connection, love. And so somehow I went down the path of learning about myself, learning about healing, learning about, what makes you move forward in life, because bad things happen to a lot of people. And, that sort of one thing led to another. And I started studying this stuff, working with people, and eventually teaching it.
Yeah. I love it. One of the things that you teach is NLP. Can you, for people that don't know what neuro-linguistic programming is, can you kind of break it down? What it is? What is it?
Sure. It's a study of it's a, let's call it an arm of psychology, but it's more not based on fixing people. It's not saying, hey, there is a mental problem, so let's fix you. It's more about getting more out of yourself, unpacking. I love this word, unpacking how you do things inside, right? If you can understand how things happen for you, how do you end up procrastinating? What is the series of steps that you do inside, the visuals, the sounds, the self-talk? You can actually do something about it. So it's a field of empowerment, which is mechanically very sound. It's quite fascinating. And the same way, it can help people move on, if you will, or dissolve. I love to use that word, dissolve negative emotions that are attached to significant emotional events from the past. Very exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. Something we talk a lot about in the podcast is this sort of the bi-directional relationship between mental health and physical health. And in the West, we'll often like to separate it, but it's not. It's one and the same, right? And mental health is physical health. And the sort of feeling side of it all, like the mental, emotional, spiritual even component of how it's stored in the body. And for people that don't know the science around that, I guess, could you set the stage on how emotional events from our past will impact our health today?
Yeah, absolutely. I've tried to explain this over the years with a concept called energy cube. And I talk a lot about it in a book that I put out last year, The Energy Cube Secret. It's really just a metaphor. If things happen in our life, I like to use the term significant emotional events. What are these? These are events where you felt a strong emotion or perhaps a cocktail of emotions. Those are the big ones. There are events you may have felt sadness, hurt, fear, all of that. If you can go back to any event in your life, you can go back to the past, you can think about it. And if you feel emotions in your body, well, guess what? The event is alive. This is not rocket science that your brain, your mind, whatever you want to call it, your nervous system needs energy to keep things alive. If you can feel emotion on the now for something that happened 20 years ago, even though it may sound legitimate, that means your brain doesn't know the difference in real and imagine. And it's using your energy that you need to move forward, that you need to create to keep that alive. So that's what we're all about. It's like you can look at an event and can you feel neutral in your body? See, the body never lies. I'm sure you agree, Dr. Will. The body never lies.
Body does not lie. So I see many people, one of the initial things we have telehealth patients fill out that we're looking at their physiological health history, looking at environmental toxins exposure and really kind of deep dive functional medicine stuff. But part of that deep dive functional medicine stuff is looking at ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences or events. And it's looking at heavy stuff, right? Like sexual trauma, physical abuse, neglect growing up. And we know the higher someone's ACE score, the more likely to have autoimmune, metabolic, hormonal, mental health issues. But I see so many people gaslight themselves and they think like it's not that bad, or they're comparing themselves to other people that have gone through relatively worse things, and they think, well, that's trauma, but my thing's not trauma, and they don't think it's a piece of their current healing puzzle. Can you shed light on that? I've heard someone say, it said before that the trauma is not in the event but the experience of the event. Is that way of a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, I love that question and the point you're making. From a neuro-linguistics perspective, this point you just made right at the end, it's in the experience of the event. Our mind takes snapshots of things. Let's think of in terms of visuals, sounds, and feelings. You and I both know, and I'm sure that your listeners do, that we have conversations in our head with other people, like full-blown conversations. We say things to them and they say things back to us. This is all happening real time. So to your point about, my trauma, mine is not trauma and theirs would be trauma. Well, it's relative. In your context, it may still play a significant role in your decisiveness, in your ability to do something or not do something, in your likes or your dislikes. As long as you can feel emotion in your body about something that happened in the past, and if you ask yourself, with what's happening in my life today, has that played a role? Then that's relevant. That it's highly relevant that you do something about it, because it is, let's put it this way, it's taken residence.
Yeah, it's taking residence in the body. And I would say also too, I've seen so many people struggling with these inflammatory problems or nervous system dysregulation, some sort of hypervigilance of the neuroimmunoendocrine axis, whether it's nervous system, inflammation, or hormonal imbalances, or all three. It's manifesting in their life. And the have a both and not either or approach. Like, yes, we have to look at physiological drivers of these dysregulations, but we also have to look at these sort of mind-body connections as well. So is there a checklist or some telltale signs that somebody could do right now to see, like, is there an area in my life that something in my past, a significant emotional event in my past is living in my body today? You mentioned like having an emotion towards it, but how would we check in with our body to figure out what that is?
Well, the first part is, how do you speak about it? How do you think about it? Do you talk about it? Is this a story? I'll give you an example. For a lot of my life, in my earlier years, I held on to a story because of some things that had happened to me. And as I look back, I utilized it a lot. Oh, well, I should be seeing a psychologist all the time. I'm lucky to be alive. People like me don't really make it. And not only did that keep me small, it became my story. And I'm going to talk about it very soon, about a concept called secondary gain. It's slightly controversial, but I will talk about that, how people may want to hold on to that story. It's that identity that comes with it. But going back to your question about, how do you think about it? How do you talk about it? How has that played a role in your decisions in your life today? And of course, checking in with the body. I mean, I used to talk about events as a grown man, and every single time to my wife, I'm talking about it and there's tears rolling out. Now, I used to think that's a good thing, especially if in the case of someone who's passed away. But in reality, it wasn't until I did this work that I realized, oh my God, that story was keeping me stuck. It comes with so many beliefs that get attached to it. And look, I've worked with thousands of people, and I can tell you, once they clear their energy cubes, in other words, we do a process called detailed personal history. So they get a chronological history of all significant emotional events from the past. And then there is a breakthrough process that's done, and they go and test it, and they feel nothing about it. They can just look at it like a movie. We don't believe in deleting memories. It's part of the fabric of who we are. But what I've noticed, and this is going to be very exciting for you, I'm not a medical doctor, and this is not medical advice, but the amount of people that I've seen walk out of there 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, write to me and wait for this one and said, my doctor just said that the cancer is no longer, I don't even know the terms, but it's dormant, or this has happened to the tumor. I had a lady who had psoriasis, and she was told that it's a lifelong condition. It was 90% of her body. Well, guess what? It was 90% gone. I'm just looking at real proof. I'm not claiming that we did anything. You did the work. You have detached emotions from past events, and here you are walking around with someone told you is lifelong. I've just lost count of these examples now.
That's
It's a
beautiful.
very simple process. It's not surgery. It's not therapy even. In fact, in our processes, you don't even have to talk about the events.
How would you describe it? I mean, from a mechanism standpoint, like I've heard it said, like metabolizing stored trauma, like allowing the body to clear it, or is it retraining the nervous system to not have that visceral, hypervigilant response? What's actually happening, I guess, as you're clearing these past emotional events?
It's sort of a mechanical process that involves a lot of visualizations. Now, to give you a small preview of it, effectively what we're asking people to do is to view their whole life as somewhat of a timeline. And then in their mind's eye, through a visualization process, we get them to, in a way, travel above. So you're not associated, you're not in the events. You're objectively looking at your whole life. And then we train people to travel over it, to the past, to the future, to the now, even though your physical body is here. Now, there is a specific position we ask him to take, and that we call it position 3. But one of the ways of describing it is the multi-dimensional neurological opposite of now. In other words, say you're up here and there is the event, say that happened at the age of 12. We get you to travel above the event, before the event, looking towards now, the future, where you are in physical reality. What do you think happens to the mind? If your doctor will tell me this, if you're before an event, what could that mean?
Well, you could probably do something different, or it's a time where you were untainted by whatever hurt you received.
Yeah, well, you're sending a very different message to your brain.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, you get an opportunity to create a new meaning. So how you do it is very important. If I send them back into the event, if I asked you to go back to an event in the past, see what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt, well, guess what? Your nervous system doesn't know the difference in real and imagined. We all know that. You can imagine, a lemon in your hand seeping down, and you can imagine, putting your hand to it, your mouth to it, and you'll feel the sourness, right? Same way, we don't get you to relive the event because the nervous system is happening again. You cannot make changes to the event. So it's very important. We call that a dissociated position. See, a lot of people are moving through life associated. They think of something and they relive it. And this happens real time all the time for people. Even when people are talking about the events, guess what? They're telling you about, Dr. Will, this happened to me, and I was little. Just as they're telling you that, the whole event is alive because you're associated.
Yeah.
So these are some of the processes we do. We get them to change the meaning, and then we do certain things on their way back to now in their visualization. And when they come back, the brain has a completely different meaning. And I can promise you that the response the body used to present is majority of the time changed, unless, there's a big unless, a person has a secondary gain, means a benefit, a secret, a conscious, and sometimes is unconscious to holding on to that event, that story.
I'd love to talk about that because you mentioned it being kind of controversial. I've seen that, right? Especially with chronic health problems, it almost comes oftentimes an unconscious identity, right? And who would they be if they didn't have it because it becomes so much part of theirs. So this is beautiful. So it's said another way, this process of it's almost you're teaching people how to have an awareness of who they are, that they're not their thoughts and emotions or the event, they're this observing presence of them, and you're sort of allowing them to have renegotiate their relationship with the event and in turn retraining their biochemistry to operate in a more balanced way. Is that a fair way of putting it?
I love the term you use, renegotiate. I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that. That's really cool. You
Shift the paradigm.
Yeah, we use the word reframing, but I love renegotiate. It's also empowering. And what does renegotiate presuppose? Choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you've got to want it. I cannot want it for you. I've got thousands of people that work with me, and there's always the few minority that are worried. Well, because here's the thing. A lot of people have gotten conditioned to getting love, sympathy, attention. And this is another little controversial one. I'm not a medical doctor, so please excuse me if this, pushes some boundaries. But even depression, in my world, in my thinking, sometimes is very, I get it, it's clinically gone too far, can be a secondary gain for what it gets us. And the last but not the least is sometimes this benefit of holding on, the benefit of holding on to the problem can exceed the benefit in the person's mind of letting it go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. And the other big one is not taking certain actions, not playing bigger, not living up to your potential. It goes back to that famous quote from that movie, Coach Carter. We don't fear that we're inadequate. Many of us, I know I was super petrified of how adequate I am.
Yeah, how powerful can you be is more scary. So let's really dive into that, because I think a lot of people, we haven't talked about it on the podcast before, but it is a phenomenon that I see clinically with some people, is the secondary gain. I haven't heard it used like that, but we talk about it as a team, this sort of identification, and it's an impediment to their healing. So how does that happen? How does maybe someone start to uncover these uncomfortable, dark parts of their relationship with their current state?
Yeah, I'm going to tap back into a point you made earlier, that people say, oh, my situation is not that bad. That person may have trauma. I'm going to use that as a reference point in a moment. But let me start with an example. Research has shown that people who go on workers' compensation, not all the time, but say you got an injury and you started to get paid to be home. And it is a genuine injury. You cannot work anymore, the job you're trained to do. And say it happened at work, getting workers' compensation. A lot of research has shown that people actually, even though the injury, technically it has a certain recovery period, 1 month, 2 months, it's proven. But if the workers' compensation part is attached to it, it actually gets worse. Now, the first thought may come, oh, well, they're faking it because well, actually, it's that self-talk that comes with it for people. Oh, now I give you an example of a chef who actually had an injury, severe injury on their wrist. The chef can't do chefing if he can't use his hands. Mm-hmm. It was meant to recover in like 2 months. Guess how long he was home? 2.5 years. Wow. Could it be that a secondary benefit developed at the subconscious level? Because your subconscious mind, the intelligence that really helps us, outside of the conscious mind, is eavesdropping on our internal dialogue. Deepak Chopra talked about it in the 80s, right? Mm-hmm. In his book, The Quantum Healing or something. Mm-hmm. And so that's a very important point. Your nervous system is eavesdropping on all your internal conversations. So the question is, what type of conversations are you having that sometimes you're not even conscious of, right? That is exacerbating that benefit you're getting from that situation. And this may not always be immediately conscious. And if you say that to a person, oh, I think you're getting a benefit, of course, there could be a lot of resistance. So it's important to put that concept out. And what I've found when I do that, people themselves evaluate. Well, you've just paid me money to be in this program. You want change. And now you're going to hold on to that? Your choice.
Mhm. Something that comes up here and what I've seen, and I think people will be thinking about, is when we're talking about these negative thoughts about ourselves, as you said, the nervous system, your cells are eavesdropping on our thoughts and emotions about ourselves and the world around us. It's impossible, right, to sustainably shift our biochemistry and our state through just positive thinking. People will be like, well, I'll just think more positive. I'm just being negative. I mean, we're talking about deep-seated neural pathways that the process you're talking about is completely shifting their biochemistry. They're not just thinking positive. Can you kind of set the record straight on that and why what we're talking about is so different than just positive thinking?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, positive thinking is an attempt, a broader attempt from the, personal development, spirituality driven, world to get people to realize that, our thoughts have some impact and that you have a choice. To your point, yes, it's hard for most people because real life means we're not always going to be positive, and it's totally okay. Like, for example, anger is okay in my view. Fear is okay. Those are all normal emotions if we know how to utilize them. Maybe not at the moment, at the time it's happening, but to consciously think positively can become draining for people. Totally, I
Yeah.
totally accept that. So there are ways of rewiring the internal processes. So think of it like a train. There's a process we use called swish. It's so powerful. I'm going to use that in the example. Say you have a negative behavior. I'm going to use a small one. I'm not going to use the big ones. Sometimes it can bring up things for people. Say you bite your nails, right? And you do it all the time. You do it unconsciously. But we are looking for the trigger event that leads to the nail biting. That's the first question we ask. For someone, it could be whenever I'm in the, in the car, I'm driving Manhattan. That's what I do. Or when I'm about to go to a meeting, I start chewing on it. Sure. Once we know the trigger event, we get them to create a picture on their screen, but they have to be in their body, looking through their own eyes. So example, they're looking at their hand, right? There's a trigger event. And I'll tell you in a moment why I'm talking about this example as a metaphor, really. We get them to bring that on the screen. Then we ask them, what is a new behavior you would like? What would you like to do instead? Oh, my hands come together and I'm relaxed. Or maybe I use my little grip thing, or I just put my hands in my pocket when that trigger event occurs. Then we get them to create a picture of that new behavior instead. Then we ask them to make it small and dark and put it on the left-hand corner of the same screen where they had the old picture. Mm-hmm. The difference in this one is your body must be visible in the picture. And then we do a process called 1, 2, 3. Wait for this one. 1, 2, 3. And in their mind, we get them to take this new picture and override the old picture. What if I told you when you do that 5 to 8 times, somewhere between 5 to 8 times we found, the old picture doesn't appear at all, or it's so blurry. And guess what happens the moment they leave the session? The behavior is gone.
Yeah.
Why I use that as a response to your question is you can do processes to redirect your brain. So every time it's going down this train track, it diverts. And this is my problem with when I learned all this. Why on earth has this not been trained to the masses? Mm-hmm. If we already have the know-how, we know, I get it. Medicine has a very important role to play, right? Science has a very important role to play. But where is the part where we say to people, you do have control? And some of these processes, Dr. Will, they take like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And an entire life's behavior has changed. You see, one of the things we teach is hypnotherapy, which is related to NLP. How do you explain a person who's been smoking for 30 years, letting go of the entire habit inside of a 90-minute session? What is the explanation for?
Yeah.
Because smoking is a program. What other programs do we have? Self-hate, self-sabotage, procrastination. These are all programs if you're willing to see it that way.
Yeah.
For your listeners.
Well, you're absolutely right. These sort of innovative, out of the box, research-based, though, techniques and modalities have been intentionally suppressed by massive industries like big pharma. It's like, right? I mean, it's just does not create a forever customer when you heal somebody and then you don't need to be dependent on it. So hopefully that will change. Do you have, it's a good question for you. Do you feel like with the shifts of the growing, I think, awareness of the people and people demanding more for their health, and hopefully maybe the democratization of information like you're giving and getting it out to more people to know, oh, yeah, I was told by my doctor I would be on this pill for forever, and this is my lot in life, but we can do something different to see something different. Do you feel like humanity is moving in the positive direction or not?
I see a lot of signs, and I can come as a CEO of this academy. We've been many years in this work, and I get to see the trends and the data of my students, and it's so amazing for me to see since COVID, the the types of people that are not just believing in this, they're just saying, like, something's got to work. Guess what? I've had doctors in my training. I've had dentists. I've had mental health therapists with 25 years experience, psychologists. And so when I see these people, and then I have everyday moms and dads, that's telling me that people are looking for the answers. That's the first thing. Number two, I think you use the word democratization of information and social media. A large number of our students swear by it, and they're all on social media. Now, if you got a whole lot of people saying, I swear by it, listen, my life's changed. I was suicidal. I was this, I was that. How can people not believe it? People get curious. So that's a good thing. It's not Reg shouting from the mountaintops. It's people who've experienced it. I'm seeing that more and more. Are people skeptical? Well, it's very easy for other industries to call this pseudoscience. I mean, what the F? Call it a pseudoscience? Well, how many people die because of science? But we call this a pseudoscience. I don't even know, by the way, what the hell that means. It's a human technology.
Yeah, go on. I don't want to stop you. Keep going.
It's human technology. In fact, originally, a lot of the tools in here were utilized by the FBI.
Yeah.
But the masses are kept in this, hypnosis, NLP. I mean, because we saw one guy on stage in Hollywood doing a little show, that's like 1% of this. So now everybody misses out on the powers of this. I would predict as much as 80% of gold medalists in Olympics are using these. They're not dumb.
Yeah.
While the masses are being made to believe that, no, in order for me to be okay, I have to put down that pill. That is all there is.
Right. Well, it's a way, saying pseudoscience or whatever, any pejorative like that, it's a way to silence people, right? To delegitimize them and keep people sick ultimately, because there's a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of hubris and elitism around a system that is centered around disease management and perpetual eternal customers. So I think more and more people are waking up to the fact that the system is rigged against them, and healthcare is not healthcare in the Western world largely. But I agree with you that I think there's more and more people waking up to wanting more for their health, wanting choices when it comes to their health, having informed consent with these sort of things. And yeah, you talk about, you even look at the data around SSRIs and antidepressants. I mean, the science around it is that they work for most people little better or about the same as placebos. And talk about placebos, it's not a pejorative against SSRIs, other than it's the power of mind over matter. When someone believes something, they're going to see, a certain percentage of people are going to see a benefit of that. Yeah, so it's always interesting when the slur of pseudoscience is thrown around so flippantly.
Yeah, I think there's a Dr. Spiegel. I hope I don't get this name wrong. He's a psychiatrist, I think, or he's connected with the Stanford University. And very recently, I'm happy to send you a link to that article. He spoke about the fact that if hypnotherapy and NLP, I don't know if he said both, he definitely said hypnotherapy, was a drug, it would be the ultimate standard of care.
Yeah.
If it was a drug, right?
Yeah.
Because you can get sessions quite cheaply, by the way. I mean, you think about, well, a small example. All the research, studies after studies have shown the most effective way of getting rid of smoking. And I don't take smoking lightly. It sounds like a person smoking. What's happening in that person's life? What's happening in their marriage? What's happening with their health? So letting go of smoking is a huge thing. And nowadays, vaping. Someone to let go of that, what health problems have they averted? So it's a very exciting field, and I'm going to go ahead and say that to your earlier question. I think we believe that until it's as familiar as the term car, we haven't even scratched the surface. And I've just really enjoyed seeing doctors who have holistic thinking in our training, like doctors. I've had neuroscience, not neuroscience, some medical doctors who identify with the term neuro. They've come in. One of them is actually doing a research. She's actually gone through my training. She's actually putting a paper together of magnificent changes that happened with her and what she saw around. So a lot of this information needs to get there, and you know, we just want to make sure. And I say that openly. I'm not a medical doctor. This is not medical advice. However, if you do wish to have better outcomes in life, you want to be open-minded to look at alternative stuff. I think more than 45% of Americans use some kind of alternative health anyway now.
Yeah.
It's pretty common.
Can we talk about limited decisions? You kind of touched on it earlier, but like people playing small and them not even realizing, you know, something we talk a lot about is just because something's common doesn't necessarily make it normal, or just because something's your everyday doesn't mean you should settle for it. And I think a lot of people play small, but they identify it with it. They don't even know they're capable of more. How is playing small and limited decision making, how is that connected to these emotional events from our past?
Yes, they're definitely connected. So the term limiting decisions, sorry. You know, there is a more commonly known term called limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
Limiting beliefs are a little bit trickier to change. I'll explain why in a moment. Because say I have a belief that I'm bad with technology, and you'll hear that from people's mouths all the time. I'm not a tech person. Excuse me. Every single person on the planet is using the most technologically advanced device ever made. But it's very easy for us to say I'm not a tech person. Sure. But by saying that, you have now created a whole bubble around you. So even when you can deal with technology, your belief comes out. That's a belief. We believe, we teach what's called limiting decision and how to resolve these decisions. So something happened when I was young. I was in high school. I auditioned for singing. I was terrible at it. By the way, I love singing, but I was terrible at it. I was one of those guys who'll give anything a shot. So I went over and I tried to sing. And there was a whole bunch of people standing at the back. And, you know, the worst thing that can happen to a high school boy is there's a whole bunch of girls laughing at the back. That was terrible. But when I walked out of the auditorium, I know I was feeling certain emotions. I felt a cocktail of sadness, hurt, you know, even anger. And that event stayed. Now, I had some opportunities come up to be in drama or plays or debates and things like that. And I recall I started to pull out of all of that. Here's what happened. I experienced a significant emotional event. Let's call it SEE on that day. It's pretty strong for a high school boy. And that's why I say you cannot, like your earlier point, you cannot compare your trauma to another. Because for me as a high school male, that was terrible. Right? I walked out of there, and it may not have been conscious to me, but at the unconscious level, a decision was made that I'm not, for example, I cannot be in front of public. I cannot be in front of groups. I cannot, you know, show myself. For 10 years after that, I was not seen in front of groups, even though I always had somewhat of a, you know, ability to do that. So I identified the limiting decision. Using the techniques I was talking to you earlier about, we went back to the event, that event. We disconnected the emotions that I felt from that event. Guess what happened? The decision completely disappeared. How do I know? When I now thought about being in public, which is pretty much what I do now, my body was not responding at all. Yeah, of course, that's what I do. So it has a real life impact. So we develop a lot of limiting decisions through our life. Things happen, significant emotional events happen. Ouch! Something gets decided. Our behavior now complies with the new limiting decision. So we have a process where we get people to choose a new empowering decision. We override the old one, install that in a person's nervous system through visualization processes. And guess what happens? Roughly about 30 to 50% of the time, at the end of the session, we ask this question saying, now, how do you feel about that old decision? 30 to 50% of the time, they go, sorry, what? And we never remind them.
Wow. Amazing. So 30 to 50% after one session. What's the success rate, I guess, for these sort of deep-seated things? And some are going to take probably more sessions than others. Like, what's the shortest, and then what's the longest, I guess, the series of sessions? What can it take for someone to see the needle moved in the positive direction?
Not many, 2, 3 sessions at the most. The key task is the identification of the limiting decision.
Yeah.
And that's where secondary gain can come in. That's where a person's desire to want to change is important, because a lot of people walk around the world saying, I cannot be helped. My problem is special. You don't understand this. You don't know how many people I've seen. I said, really? Okay. I've heard the worst and worst of humanity, Dr. Wilco. I've heard things that no ear should ever hear. And I believe if you want change, it is 100% possible. Those things need to be sorted. But we're actually in the business of now, where we have been training people with the tools, 2 things they can do. They've got them for life now. For example, for me, every level of business I go up, new limiting decisions come in. I said the other day to my team, I said, we're going to have a 1,000-person event in Las Vegas. That's my decision, right? We're going to have a 1,000-person event because that's my vision, and we want to give a lot of people change. We can't go very deep in like 2 days, but we'll give them enough change so they know change is possible. Sure. I walked out of the meeting, limiting decision number 1, limiting decision number 2, right? Oh my God, the organization is going to be so hard. And then I'm able to look at them and start smashing them one by one. So we empower people to take these tools with them and then utilize them. And they also get qualified and trained so they can help other people. So it's a win-win.
Yeah.
It's a really cool that way.
And one of the biggest impediments of like someone slow to respond or slow to heal or stuck is the secondary gain, right? It's that identification, and maybe they're not willing to let that go. And then I could think of like the person that does have a chronic health problem, and we're talking, yeah, I mean, that's going to be a piece of their puzzle, and maybe their symptoms are going to dramatically improve. And then for some people, maybe it's not. Maybe it is an environmental toxin or a gut health issue that, yes, the mind, body, and mental, emotional stuff is a piece of their puzzle, but it's not the only piece of the puzzle. But I'd be curious to get what you've seen in all the thousands of people you've seen over the years for somebody that it didn't take all their problems away, their health problems away. But I have seen this is there's like this inner stillness and grace and lightness around it where it doesn't have the sting. Their symptoms don't have the sting that it once did. Have you seen that before? I'm sure you have.
Wow. Yes, I have. See, the mind-body connection is huge, but we also say you need the building blocks. So physical body is the physical body. Like if something has happened, if there's a certain type of damage that's occurred and the building block is not available, then it is possible that, full recovery may not occur. Doesn't matter what you do with your mind, you do need supplementation. You want to look at the physical and the mental, right? And you talk a lot about this. What are you consuming in the food? The chemicals, the colors, all this stuff, right? But that alone cannot harm you if your mind is in order. But at the same time, you're working only on your mind while consuming that all the time. It doesn't give you the highest benefit. So in reality, though, when people change the meaning of events in their life, it does definitely bring in a level of peace and takes away, I love the word you use, sting. And I'm going to tell you this, there is a research that came out of Europe, which had roughly 40,000 case studies on cancer with CT scan. And they indicated the following: the client has a significant emotional event for which the client had no strategy and he or she obsesses about it, right? As a result of that, the nervous system sends wrong information to, actually, I should not go that deep. I'm talking about organs here. Here's what I want to say. What they found was in most of those cases, 40,000 people, the client developed cancer onset in up to 1 to 3 years after the event. And these significant emotional events, in the case of cancer, for example, there's not medical advice. And I've checked with a lot of my students. Typically, they had these characteristics. It was surprise, unexpected, dramatic, isolating, means you're alone. You don't, really know who to tell, right? And no strategy, right? These are the common things you find. There are these characteristics that are present. And on top of that, the client is obsessing about it, thinking about it, dwelling on it. And so those are some of the things. I'm sure there's a lot of other theories on cancer and these bigger illnesses. And, you know, I've had a lot of students who've carried these big ones. And I always use that. I talk to them. I say, well, can you tell me what happened? When did you get it? She said, you know, 2014. What was happening in your life 1 to 3 years before? I'd really stay in that 1 to 3 year mark. I would say 99% of the time I found they had a major event.
Yeah.
Physical, violence, sexual. That's been a big one. Sexual trauma. That's a huge one, by the way. Huge.
Yeah. And it's not talked about enough, and it's not uncovered oftentimes because it's super, obviously it's very vulnerable, and not, people don't feel safe to kind of share that, and they suppress it, right? A lot of times people don't even want to go there on a conscious level.
Yeah, well, the isolating component is stronger on that, because sometimes especially people have things happen in teenage life, and you know, research has shown that a lot of people will keep certain things in their life. In other words, they'll take him to the grave. Nobody will ever know.
Yeah, yeah. And I have seen that where it's as I mentioned, like dealing with the mind-body component could be tremendously healing on physical health. And for some people, I've seen it improve their symptoms, but there is this radical acceptance that happens because if you have someone like symptoms like pain, right? Pain from a chronic degenerative disease, and there's, let's just say, joint destruction because of chronic inflammation, you're never going to undo all of that degenerative change, but there will be less inner resistance around what is when you start to reprogram your nervous system, or what we're talking about here. So there's not compounded pain and suffering and exacerbation of symptoms because of this sort of grace and lightness. I think I've seen that without a doubt over the years. This has been such a great conversation, my friend. As you know, the podcast is called The Art of Being Well. At the end of every episode, we have Your Art of Being Well. So first question is, what is the worst tasting healthy food that you eat? You don't do it for health, for taste, or do it for the health benefits alone?
Worst tasting healthy food?
Yeah, like something that you tolerate, but it's not for the taste. It's for the health benefits.
Oh God, I've had a few of them, and then eventually I end up liking them all.
Yeah, so that's good. That's a good lesson in life. I love that lesson. So what's one of those examples?
Eventually I end up liking them all. So I'm gonna pick I mean, there's a apple cider vinegar style potion, if you will, that I have. And I have it daily. I just love the benefits of apple cider vinegar. And even now, when I have it most of the time, I'm like, ouch. But I just keep having it.
Yeah, no, I love it. That sort of bitter, tart, acidic type, vinegary type taste. I love ACV too. Next question is, what is the maybe most out of the box, unconventional thing you've done for your health that you're willing to admit on a podcast?
Unconventional thing for my health. Unconventional.
And for some people, they don't have one. For some people, they just, they're pretty mainstream when it comes to different health practices or biohacking trends they've seen or done.
I've done the I don't know if it's unconventional or not, the rebounder.
Yeah.
You know, I read a book about 20 years ago, which I wish I would know the title, but it's like Natural Things They Don't Want You to Know About, or something like that. This was 20 years ago I read it. And he spoke a lot about the rebounder and how doing, 20, 50 jumps a day, I can't remember the exact science, but the impact it has on literally like your entire well-being. So yeah, often people could find me just jumping up and down.
Jumping around.
I love doing that.
That's a good answer. Do you take supplements? And if so, what are 2 supplements that are essentials for you?
Yes, I'm regular with supplements for vitality, for energy. I love magnesium, vitamin D, 2 really big ones.
Good answers.
And lately I take NMN.
Yeah.
You would know about NMN. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was recommended to me, and I really am seeing difference as a 45 plus male. I also have Shilajit and Tongkat Ali.
I love it. You're getting into the adaptogens and some superfoods there.
Molecule. Yeah.
A next question is, what's somewhere that you haven't been to in the world that that's on your bucket list?
Egypt,
Yeah, same
just,
here.
I really want to be around those, the energy of those pyramids and really do my own work, own thinking in that environment is something that I'm not far from it. It's coming up soon.
Great. What's a book that you've read in your life, could be fiction or nonfiction, that just is paradigm shifting for you? I'm getting kind of a running book club list for the Art of Being Well.
Yeah, running paradigm shift for me. Again, there's been so many. I would pick, uh, the classic sort of psycho-cybernetics. You ever heard of that book?
No, I haven't. What's it about?
Psycho-cybernetics. I think this was my very early interaction with the idea of our self-image, and doesn't matter what you do on the outside, who you see is who you'll be. And this was written by a plastic surgeon, I think, who had done so many surgeries for people, and he found that people would keep coming back. It was the nose, it was the eyes, it was all this stuff, but they were not happy inside. How they saw themselves inside was not changing, no matter. And that's why you see people who do a lot of work, they just keep doing it. But in that book, it really brought me close to this idea of how you see yourself inside, how you hold your own image has such a material impact on what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, and who you see is who you'll be. And so that's what really, those are the earlier times when I'm like, well, wait, how do you change who you see yourself as? And those are some of the things that book was really good for me at the time.
Yeah, formative to now the work that you do. What is
Cybernetics, it's called.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, my friend, where do people go to learn more about your work, get into the system, start practicing it in their life? What do they have to do?
So there's a few things people can do who really are serious about, making these changes, who want to make those choices, who want to let go of secondary gain, who are believing that there is a path forward, particularly with your own personal psychology. They can go and look at what we do on neuromastersacademy.com. That's one word. They can also book in a call and speak to one of our master practitioners and talk about what has happened in their life and what are their goals, and figure out if there is a path forward. They can also they can connect with my personal account on Instagram, which is Reg Malhotra Official. I think I'm connected to you. And they can send a DM directly to that account and use the word, is that okay, Will Cole?
Yep, all one word, that's fine. And I have a special URL too, but yeah, let them know on Instagram. So reach out to you on Instagram, and
they can do that. They can send the word Will Cole, and one of our team will send them a video, a master class, so they can improve their knowledge. And if they were to go to neuromastersacademy.com/Will Cole, we're setting that up. If they proceed to do one of our programs, they can start with a 3-day program. Then we will offer them a 20% for any product they've initially purchased or enroll in for owing to this conversation with you.
I love it. So I'll repeat back: neuromastersacademy.com/Will Cole. And that's neuromastersacademy.com/Will Cole. And then I have code. If they use code Will Cole, they'll get that 20% off. Or again, you can go on Instagram. So many ways to connect. My friend, thanks so much for coming on. I was really excited about today's conversation.
It's been great. Thank you.